coming to a point now where our industry really needs to have a good look at itself, because in the media this week, fines are going up dramatically. Fines for doing the wrong thing are doubling. Some of them going up to $26,000, wow, which is the maximum court imposed fine. It's not a regulation problem, it's a market problem. Our actual transport market has been built around running to the limit. Without trucks, everything stops. Do whatever we can to make the industry safe, sustainable and viable.
Hello and welcome to the Talking Transport Show. I'm your host, Jacqueline Brotherton, and with me today is Glyn Castanelli, the President of the National Road Freighters Association, and who is also in audit and compliance for the heavy vehicle industry. Welcome, Glyn. Thanks for coming and joining us today.
G'day, Jacqueline. The NRFA is a small association, probably one of the smallest, but we're very active. We were originally formed in 2008 to represent drivers and owner-drivers and small fleet operators who felt that they weren't getting a say in regulation before they were written. So, back in 2008 was the first issue of the current HVNL. So,
remember it well.
So that sort of sparked a bit of interest that, hey, maybe we should have been involved. Absolutely. At the start. A group of drivers and owner drivers got together and they thought, let's form an association that represents people who are behind the steering wheel, and that's what we've continued to do. So we try not to be critical and we try not to agitate too much. We just try to give constructive input into what's happening in the industry. So we made a list the other day, and we're volunteers, so we don't have any paid staff. And it's quite a daunting task to try to have input from the driver at all of the different parts of the industry.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's about 20, and another 2 come through last week. So there's about 22 different committees that we're involved in at the moment to, try to have input.
But you really need that driver and small operator input, because they're the ones that are really there on the ground doing, well, especially the drivers, that it affects the most.
It does. So anything that changes in our industry has to be compatible with what's happening out on the road. And
absolutely,
it's very important to have driver input. So we've grown significantly over the years, and probably the only really driver representative body that truly represents the people behind the steering wheel. We've got the Transport Workers Union, but they're mostly in the major cities, where our members come from all over the country, from regional, rural Australia, carting, the goods between major capitals and rural centres, and, that they are the people who, have to implement whatever changes we have in the industry.
And that's the thing with the rural Australia being so spread out, and the rural transport companies and the rural drivers are what holds those communities together and supports them. And one thing, I know I didn't have this on my list today, but one thing people don't understand is how much those small transport companies put back into their communities. But it's the ones that back their local soccer teams and back their local football teams and put in so many other ways. It's not only volunteering for your association, it's how much they, in times of flood and the bushfires and all the things else. The big companies do a massive amount too. I'm not taking it away from them. But it's these small companies, and so many of them have gone out of business or closed down because they have no one else to take it on, or it's become too hard, that's causing a massive follow-on effect to these small communities and rural cities and so forth over the last few years.
Yeah, transport is an integral part of every small community in Australia, because without trucks, everything stops.
So I think we have to I bore people to death when I sit next to them on a plane or a train or something about nothing that they touch has not been touched by a truck at some stage. I don't care whether it's in your supermarket or your furniture store, or unless you catch and kill your own food and you live in your hemp close at some point.
Yep.
I read a story years ago now. A truck driver in the United States was homeschooling his truck and his daughter, and he said, without trucks, everybody would be naked, hungry, and homeless. And I think that applies. That's stuck in my mind because it was pretty funny. And I think that applies in Australia too. It's the US and Canada and Australia are pretty much the same, and probably a lot of places in Africa as well. So
it does, and I like to use the word everything because I think if we start categorising it into a couple of things, I think people just need to understand that everything touches a truck.
I think
I was going to say
absolutely everything.
Regional Australia is unique. I've done a lot of driving out west, especially west of Brisbane. Those communities out there, they understand that everything everything they need for to survive comes on a truck, and they do treat truck drivers really well out there.
Yeah.
Right now, there's probably never been so much going on, changing as far as the industry goes, the workforce of the industry, the businesses involved in the industry, with a lot of people leaving the industry, with the changes in regulation. And it's a perfect storm for a compliance person.
And that's due on August 1st, I believe, new changes?
Yes, due on August 1st. And that's taken a lot of all of the associations' time to make sure that they lobby and have input to those changes as they've been coming over the last several years. But the last few months have been intense, and we're coming to a point now where our industry really needs to have a good look at itself, because in the media this week, fines are going up dramatically. So fines for doing the wrong thing are doubling. Some of them going up to $26,000, which is the maximum court-imposed fine.
Yeah.
And not that I wanted to talk about fines, but it just relates to the whole industry, because we're at a point now where we really need to stand up and dust ourselves off and have a look at what we're doing. And, we're all brought up on getting the job done, on doing whatever it took to get the job done, keep the customer happy. If a miracle needed to be performed, you'd find a good truck driver, a good transport operator, and they would perform that miracle.
We did, but I think on the other side of that, and I was thinking about this last night when I couldn't sleep, the other thing was back when I first joined, and obviously most of the drivers were on the Sydney Mount Isa or the Melbourne Mount Isa or Melbourne Darwin run. If they were supposed to be there on Tuesday and something happened and they got there on Wednesday, it was more like, well, you're supposed to be here yesterday. And they were, well, I couldn't make it because X happened. And there wasn't a big blow up and, fines back to the company because, you didn't make it here yesterday. So there was that big push to, be in, because they had this urgent freight. But there was also that understanding from people when something happened and the driver just didn't get there at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning because the roads are shocking and trucks weren't much better, and there was all those things happen. People actually saw the human side or the mechanical side, because if you're working with humans or mechanical objects, things are going to go wrong, and there was much more understanding about that, I think. And as I said back then, you're supposed to be here, but now there's such a huge song and dance if you don't make that time slot, or or the customers are likely to go, well, if you don't make those time slots, X amount of time slots in a month or whatever, there's a penalty for it. And that's the problem, and I don't know whether that still applies, but that's the problem we have. There's not that understanding that things happen.
And truck drivers and operators have not been kind to themselves, because they've always seen there's a challenge to make sure they get there. And they'll do what it takes. So when I started driving, we'd
always over-delivered.
We'd work all day and drive all night.
Yeah. So but most of our generation have adapted with the change, but still fatigue and other issues can't be managed by a clock. They've got to be managed by your body. And I know that goes against the actual law, but that's human. I can do one thing today that won't tire me, but tomorrow I could be halfway through the task and I would need to have a break. But you can't, because whatever it's called now, the work diary or the camera says, look, I have to push on to do that, whereas I really shouldn't be. And this is my biggest problem with it, is because obviously I'm not really in that part of the industry now, is we need to do that. Everybody says, oh yeah, but you can take your break because you feel fatigued. But then you can't make a commitment, and then everybody's onto you. So they've got to be realistic. You should be able to manage your fatigue to the point that, today I don't feel up to doing my 5 hours or whatever the hours are. And I need to have, and I've done a lot of miles in my car over the years living down here and all my family being interstate. So, and that's got to be the same for truck drivers.
It is. And this is one of the areas that the NRFA is really looking into at the moment. So our goal, we said a few years ago, was that we just want to do whatever we can to make the industry safe, sustainable and viable. And
they're pretty strong words.
They're pretty strong words, but we wanted to follow on and keep pushing from the Senate inquiry that was conducted, without Trucks Australia Stops by Glenn Castanelli. And we see that as our mission, is to follow that through. And our industry has always worked to the limit. So, what you said just then is, we can't pull up and have a 2-hour nap under the tree just before Benalla, which is a really nice spot to pull up, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because we need to get to where we're going. Otherwise, we won't be able to do our time slot in the morning.
Exactly.
And that is, to us, that's not a regulation problem. It's a market problem. So our actual transport market has been built around running to the limit. We all run at 100, we hold it flat down the highway. If you're running through the fog in the middle of the night, I remember, you'd always, I don't know why we did it and how we did it, but you'd stay on it all night no matter what, because that's what you needed to do. We do the same with our businesses. The tipper industry loads to 100%. They quote jobs loading to 100%. Transport operators cannot pay for a truck, have a one truck, one driver operation without that truck working his 72 hours a week. His 144 hours a fortnight. Well, the world has changed.
Absolutely.
And we find out there talking to the next generation, people do not want to work that long.
They don't, and that's the thing. I make a joke about it. Like, what's happening to people? They want a life. Like, the drivers, you send them away for a week, you send them away for 2 weeks, you send them away for 3 weeks, and then they came home and had a couple of days off and they went again. And that was just how life was. And you never thought anything about it, because that was how, back in the 70s and even the 80s, that's how life worked.
The industry just sucked it up, did the job,
and we all did the same,
and got it done.
And in operations, if you were at the office for 12 or 15 hours, you just went home at the end of those things and you took the phone with you. And if your phone rang 12 times that night while you were in bed and not asleep, you did it and you got up and did the same thing next day. And that's just because you wanted to be in transport or you fell into transport. That's what you did. And then if you loved your life and if you loved your job or if you loved your partner, that's just where you stayed, and that's just how it was. So what do you see the main positives of the NRFA? Obviously, it is representing those smaller operators, those truck drivers. And truck drivers have a lot of common sense to contribute to the industry, because they are out there every day and they see things that's happening. And I have a lot of faith in our truck drivers and what they contribute, not only what they contribute in their work, but they've got so much time to think about how things can be better. And I know that they whinge, and that's part of their job, but they really do have a lot of common sense. They have a lot to contribute, and we don't pay enough attention.
They do, and that's what we try to do with NRFA, is to take that practical approach from the driver's point of view. And we get a lot of feedback from our drivers, and we also have to educate our members as well. Like I started out talking about fines. Well, this week there's been this blow up on social media about the amount of, the amount the fines are going up to. And it's like everybody who makes a mistake in their work diary, all of a sudden, this is the perception out there at the moment, that we've had to sort of try to put out some alternate perceptions, should I say. But the perception is, because of the way people work in social media, they only put out the worst case scenario, that anybody who gets pulled up with something wrong in their book's going to get a $26,500 fine on the side of the road. So that's just an example of how we need to also educate our drivers as well. So we see that as our role, to be that calming voice to, hey, hold on a minute.
These are the facts.
These are the facts. And I quickly wrote a story for Big Rigs this week to make sure that there was something out there with the alternate perception to what's going on. And, so that's our role, is to be that calming voice in the middle between the driver the voice of reason, because some of these changes are really good for industry. It's high time that customers were held to account.
Absolutely. I think the thing is, as soon as there's something that not only that they look at the worst case scenario, but there's and doomsayers out there and doomsayers in the industry, and there's always been them. Like, I had an argument many years ago now, not an argument, but I was pretty peeved. So many people in our industry, we have this huge personnel problem in our industry, not only truck drivers, that we have a shortage of personnel. And they're all saying, it's tough, it's hard, I'd never let my kids work in the industry, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but you want other people's kids to work in the industry. And you badmouth the industry all the time, but you want to, you don't want your kids to work in it, but you expect other kids to work in it. And I said to a woman, do you work for a transport company? And she said, yes. She said, but I know nothing about trucks. I said, what do you do? She said, I work in the finance division. I said, are they good to you? And she said, oh, very good to me. And I said, well, that's what you should be saying. I work for a trucking company. They're really, really good to me, because you know what? Those trucks are paying your wages. And she's like, I said, well, man, if you don't have those truck drivers, they don't need you. Yep. Well, she was a little bit affronted by that. But it was in a room full of people. And it's quite true, because if a trucking company doesn't have truck drivers, why do they need the other people?
Well, that's right. And the other people need the accountants to make sure they get paid and that the bills are getting paid. And everything works off each other.
And so they have to be, but if you have all these doomsayers saying how tough our industry is and how hard it is and, all this, how do we then invite these other people to come in and work in it? And then, as you say, they have all this, social media is just I'm an anti-social media person. The first thing they do is put the bad stuff out.
Yep.
And that's why we have to have associations that come in with straight away with the voice of reason before it becomes this catastrophic thing that happens and everybody's going, oh my God, the world's going to end and I'm going to retire.
Yep. The doomsdayers get the most clicks. That gets way more, interaction than somebody that says that, those fines are going up, but the fine for a minor fatigue breach is going down from $600 to $350.
Which we're majorly happy about.
That's right, because they're the simple mistakes that our drivers will make day to day. They'll make a 15 or a 30-minute mistake, and now they won't be hit as hard for those. And that's what we push for through this HVL process, was that we wanted our drivers, the people we represent, to not be punished for minor things.
Exactly.
But we wanted the operators, and the customer in particular, to have fines that would really deter them from.
Well, I think we've talked so much about the customer being, in the chain and the customer being responsible, but we haven't in too many cases followed through on that.
No.
And I think that's really important. And there's still, and not the big customers, but it's still so many of the smaller customers that don't see where they fit in that chain, and they don't quite know how that affects them, and they don't get straight answers. And I think
it is quite straight, which is they are fully captured.
Yeah, yes. But
all right, but the grey area isn't in their knowledge. So they've got grey knowledge.
Yeah, and,
and that needs to be more black and white.
Answers, yes. Their answers are not always straightforward,
even
though the rule might be straightforward. But I found that not the Dobbin line, but the hotline for your questions to the NHV is fabulous. I found that was really, really good.
They are always very accommodating. Yeah. So look, we do not go bashing the NHV or the NTC as an association, because They have a job to do.
Yeah, I found that hotline amazing. And they don't use it to come back at you. If you go in there and say, look, I've got this problem and I know it's wrong, but I just don't know how to fix it. But I think this is how we're going to fix it. And I found them to be fabulous with that. But what I did find, and I did talk to them about it at one stage, was I don't think people saw the two lines as something totally different. And I said that was probably something that really needed to be very clear, because there's a lot of people that wouldn't use the Dobbin line, or they were frightened if they used the hotline that it would come back at them. But I found that they were fabulous. But I found that people that just rang in or spoke to a person like randomly didn't get the answers. But when I used that hotline several times in one of my roles, the answers were, even if they didn't have the answer right then, they would either look at your solution and clean it up, or they would come back to you with a solution. And I found that was really good. But we use that as a transport industry, whereas these other, as I say, the smaller customers and the smaller manufacturers who have their own little trucks and stuff don't necessarily think that they're covered under it. That was a big issue. That our biggest problems were with those ones.
Very common in that segment of the market. So
absolutely, yeah.
We think that all trucks are owned by transport companies.
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's something like 58% of truck ownership is incidental to another business.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's actually the larger part of the industry that are running trucks up and down the road or using trucks around the city here today, incidental to another business that their main money-making adventure is making concrete or building a bridge or
making dim sims.
Yeah.
Something totally...
Exactly.
Something totally
making
different.
dim sims. That is a perfect example, because how do the dim sims get there on a truck? And quite often the food manufacturer will own a few trucks.
Absolutely. I had a... so just quickly before we finish up, do you have any particular points of advocacy that you're campaigning for at the moment, or is there anything on your agenda coming up that is a hot subject?
There is. I was lucky enough to go to the ATA conference in Hamilton Island. But my role there, I went there representing NRFA as their president. And then the second thing was I'd been asked to present in a safety presentation with Melissa Weller and Adam Gibson and myself. We were presenting. Anne Lopez was running our session. And I was asked to present a new safety idea for our industry that the ATA could take on as policy. But there's something that the NRFA has been working on for many years. So this is like at least 6 years solidly, and that is trying to change our industry through changing the market. Our industry, my presentation was, cheap freight isn't safe freight.
Yeah.
And I compared it to Alkaloff, to a fellow called Alkaloff. Alkaloff won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for his economic work in relation to a market for lemons. So a market for lemons is where the customer only sees price. So when the customer can only see price, they can't see the true value. So the quality product that costs more to produce has to compete with the poorer quality product because quality is hidden. So the poor quality product sets the market price. And that is the perfect description of our industry in its current economic sort of crisis at the moment, which is we've been in a race to the bottom on price and on quality for as long as I can remember. But it's intensifying now. We've got sham contracting, we've got dodgy operators that everybody sees every day running up and down the road with trailers. You just think, holy moly, how are they getting out on the road with that gear? And my example was we need to set an entry gate. So this is an NRFA policy. So we need to come up with a entry gate where people have to prove their capability before they can get work in our industry. And I put forward 3 options for that, which was compulsory accreditation, which is already happening over in WA. So anybody who operates a vehicle over 42.5 tonne or breaks a dimension has to have WA-HVA accreditation. The second option was operator licensing, which would be probably the strongest gate of entry, if we could set operator licensing, where you had to be a fit and proper person, you had to be economically viable, you had to have your safety capability, all safety management system and everything in place, and also employment standards could be part of a operator license, and that would be that would be the most effective, but the hardest to set up, because that would take new legislation and regulation and a whole system behind that on how we would run that. And the third option was a industry-wide contract chain order through Fair Work. And RFA has been very big in that area. We've been part of 2 contract chain orders so far since Transport got its own division of Fair Work. And as an example, one of those is for 30-day payment terms, which has started in 2024. And that is nearing completion. So we've got a few more hearings later in the year, and hopefully that will turn into a contract chain order for 30-day payments. So that's just an example. And recently we worked with the ATA and the Transport Workers Union and RTO, Australian Road Transport Industry Organisation, to put in place a fuel contract chain order so that operators could get fuel cost recovery for the spike in fuel recently. So there are examples of contract chain orders. We could bring in a contract chain order which would cover the whole of Australia, because it's through Fair Work, and enforce safety capability throughout the whole contract chain. So they were the 3 options that I put forward, and I sort of suggested that the answer may be a combination of those, where first we may do compulsory accreditation to bring every operator into line to the same safety capability. And then second, a contract chain order, so that we hold the customer to account, that they have to ensure that they do not award freight to somebody who doesn't meet the safety capability we've set.
Yeah.
So that is a really hard sell to 250 transport people at the ATA conference. But I stood up there and did it, and I'm quite proud that I did, because somebody has to have this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm afraid we're going to have to finish it off there, Glyn, but I'm really had a great conversation.
That's okay.
Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, great to have you join us. Do you have a conference of your own coming up anytime soon, just before we finish? We
do. So in February, we'll start announcing that soon, but it's early February, and it's going to be in Albury-Wodonga.
February 2027?
2027. So we normally have the first conference of the year for all of the associations.
Yeah, before conference season starts, so you're the kicker.
We kick it off.
That's great. So we'll look forward to that announcement coming out. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us for the Talking Transport show. We'll be back again with another session very shortly. Thank you.